The notice went up on a Wednesday. I know because I remember the exact quality of light coming through the office window, flat, gray, the kind of morning that smells like cold radiators and microwaved oatmeal. I was standing at the communal corkboard outside the break room with a coffee mug in one hand and a piece of toast I hadn't touched in the other, reading a piece of paper that had been pinned slightly crookedly, with a single red thumbtack. New team lead, Meridian Analytics, Owen Pope. Effective immediately. All project updates to be routed through Mr. Pope starting this week. Please introduce yourselves at your earliest convenience. That was it. No biography. No warm welcome. No cheerful HR-approved paragraph about how excited the company was to have him, or how he brought 15 years of experience and a passion for collaborative problem solving. Just a name and an instruction. Nadia appeared at my shoulder. She always appeared. It was one of her gifts, showing up precisely when something interesting was about to happen, as if she had a sixth sense for gossip. Owen Pope, she read aloud, drawing out both syllables of the last name like she was tasting them. That's a name. It's a perfectly normal name. It sounds like a Bond villain. It sounds like a person's name, I said. Which is what it is, because he's a person. Has anyone seen him yet? Nadia, the notice was put up 20 minutes ago. She took a long sip of her coffee, looking thoughtful. I heard from Delia in accounting that he transferred from the Bristol office, and that he's, and I'm quoting here, not very warm. I finally took a bite of my toast. Plenty of effective managers aren't warm. She said he once ended a meeting after 4 minutes because, and again I quote, none of you have read the brief. Honestly, I said. Fair. Nadia looked at me with a particular expression she reserved for moments when she thought I was being deliberately difficult. Then she took her coffee and went back to her desk, and I stood there a moment longer looking at the name on the paper. Owen Pope. I told myself I was just curious, the way you're curious about anything new. A changed route to work, a different brand of shampoo, a stranger's name on a corkboard. Simple, mild human curiosity. Nothing more. I went back to my desk. I had a deadline. I had a full inbox. I had absolutely no reason to spend any more time thinking about the new team lead. I met him 4 days later. I want to be precise about this, because the story of how I met Owen Pope is also, in some ways, the story of who I am when I think no one is watching. It was late past 7, the office mostly emptied out, the overhead fluorescents doing their best impression of an interrogation room. I had stayed behind to finish a data reconciliation report that was due the next morning, and that I had, in a moment of spectacular overconfidence earlier that week, told my manager was basically done. It was not basically done. It was not done in any sense. It was a document with a title, 3 incomplete tables, and a placeholder that said, "Figure to be confirmed, do not send," in aggressively red text. I was on my 3rd cup of tea, my jacket off, my sleeves rolled up, talking to my spreadsheet in a low, continuous murmur the way some people talk to houseplants. Not words exactly, more like a running commentary of small grievances. That's wrong, why is that number there, what is that number, I didn't put that number in, where did you come from, go away. Are you talking to your computer? I spun around so fast my tea sloshed. A man was standing in the doorway of the open plan office holding a laptop bag over one shoulder, a reusable coffee cup in his other hand. He looked at me with an expression that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite anything else. It was very still, very level. Like a body of water that might be shallow or might be very deep and gave no indication which. He was tall. Dark hair, a little overgrown, curling at the collar of a gray shirt with the top button undone. Sharp jaw. The sort of eyes that looked darker than they probably were in good light. He was, I noticed this the way you noticed a car is red or a wall is high. Objectively good-looking, in a quietly severe way that made you want to look again and then pretend you hadn't. The spreadsheet is being difficult, I said, because I had to say something. Spreadsheets don't have intentions, he said. This one does. This one is actively hostile. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, almost a consideration of one. Owen Pope, he said. I'm the new team lead. Yes. I stood up, wiped my tea-damp hand on my trousers, and extended it. Billy Turner. Data and analysis. He shook it. His grip was brief and firm. He had the handshake of someone who'd been taught to have a good handshake and had simply never stopped. You're the one who flagged the Hargrove account discrepancy in March, he said. I blinked. You've read the files. I read all the files. The Hargrove thing was months ago. There were probably 40 other reports since. Yours had a footnote explaining why the standard reconciliation formula wouldn't catch the error type without a secondary filter. Most people don't write footnotes. I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was more like an observation, stated flatly, the way you might note that a bridge is structurally sound. Here is a fact, here it is. What's the issue? He asked, nodding toward my screen. Q3 actuals aren't matching the projections and I can't find where the variance is coming from. I've checked the source data 3 times. He set down his laptop bag and his coffee cup, walked over, and looked at my screen. He stood close enough that I caught a brief impression of something clean and faintly cedar-scented before I firmly redirected my attention to the spreadsheet. He pointed. Your date filter is including the 1st of October. I stared at it. He was right. One day, one single day, a Thursday in early October, had crept into the Q3 range because of a formatting error in the original import, and its 3 entries had been throwing off every downstream calculation. That's it, I said. That is entirely, completely it. Fix the import format and it'll cascade correctly. I've been here for 2 hours. I can see that. There was a pause. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, more like the space after a sentence where neither of us had decided yet whether there was more to say. Thank you, I said. He picked up his bag and his cup. Go home, he said. Not unkindly. Just directly, the way you tell someone there was spinach in their teeth. Here is a fact. Act on it. Then he walked out. I sat down, fixed the filter, watched the report recalculate itself into perfect alignment, and then sat there for another moment in the empty office feeling something I couldn't quite name, something like being seen, and being slightly wrong-footed by it. The thing about Owen Pope was that within a week, everyone in the office had formed an opinion about him. Nadia thought he was intimidating. Marcus from the analytics subteam thought he was brilliant but cold. Priya from client relations thought he was rude. Delia from accounting had elevated her initial report to definitely not warm, possibly a minor sociopath, but in an organized way. I thought they were all slightly wrong, in the way that people are wrong when they describe a color they've only seen once in bad lighting. He wasn't cold, he was precise. There's a difference, though it can be hard to see from the outside. Cold people don't care what the answer is. Owen Pope cared enormously, he just didn't perform caring the way people expected. He didn't soften his voice when he gave feedback. He didn't preface corrections with, "Great work on this but." He said what was accurate and stopped speaking. It was, once you got used to it, oddly restful. You always knew where you were. I knew where I was because he started routing questions to me, not through a formal process. He never sent a group email saying, "Billy Turner is my point person." He just began appearing at my desk with questions that were technically answerable by 3 or 4 different people on the team, but that he'd chosen to bring to me. The Q3 variants had apparently established something. I was the person who wrote footnotes. I was, by extension, the person worth asking. The first time, he came to ask about a client account I'd been managing for 2 years. The second time, it was a methodology question about weighted averages. The third time, he sat in the chair next to my desk. Marcus's chair, which Marcus wasn't using, and opened his laptop and said, "Walk me through the Alderton projections. I want to understand how you built the model." So I walked him through it, and he listened the way very few people listen, without nodding along performatively, without jumping ahead, without his eyes drifting to his phone. He looked at the screen and occasionally at me, and he asked questions that were sharp and specific, and that made me have to actually think, about choices I'd made months ago on instinct and now had to justify out loud. It was, I realized, somewhere in the middle of explaining my weighting rationale, the most engaged I'd felt at work in years. When I finished, he closed his laptop. "The model's good," he said. "The visualization undersells it. The chart on page 4 makes it look flat. I know, I didn't make the charts. Who did?" "It was a team effort," I said, in a tone that clearly communicated it had been Priya's intern on a Friday afternoon. He looked at me for a moment. "Fix the charts," he said, and stood up and took his laptop back to his office. I fixed the charts. I also, that evening, found myself replaying the conversation on the walk home. Not because anything significant had happened, but because it had been in some way I couldn't pin down. Satisfying in the way that a good meal is satisfying, or a problem finally solved, or a piece of music that resolves exactly as it should. I told myself it was just professional engagement. I was enjoying working with someone competent. That was all. I want to be honest about when it stopped being just that, because I think it's important to be honest about these things, even when honesty is somewhat embarrassing. It was the end of the third week. We'd been in back-to-back client review meetings all day. The kind of meetings that make you feel like your brain has been wrung out and hung up to dry. By 5 o'clock, most of the team had either left or was sitting at their desks with the glazed expression of people running on caffeine and obligation. Owen was still at his desk. He was always still at his desk, and I was packing up my bag when he appeared at my door. "Do you eat dinner?" he asked. I looked up. "That's a very strange way to, he said. And I saw something cross his face that might have been the faintest edge of self-correction. I was going to get food. "There's a place 2 streets over, if you haven't eaten." I had not eaten. I had have half a sandwich at 11:30 and a packet of biscuits at 3, and I was, now that he mentioned it, extremely hungry. "Sure," I said. We walked to the place 2 streets over, which turned out to be a small, determinedly unfussy restaurant with wooden tables and a menu that changed daily on a chalkboard. We sat across from each other and ordered, and the food came, and we talked. That was the whole of it, and also the entire point of it, and also the moment everything shifted, though I didn't understand that until later. We talked about the client meetings, then about the company's medium-term strategy, which Owen had strong opinions about, that he delivered in the same direct, unembellished way he delivered everything. Then about a book he'd been reading, something about systems thinking in organizations, and I said I'd read it 2 years ago. And we disagreed about the central thesis in a way that was stimulating enough that I forgot to finish my food. He disagreed with me the way he did everything, without softening it, without being performatively disagreeable. Just, "Here is where I think you're wrong, and here is why." And because he wasn't trying to win, just trying to be accurate, I found myself actually listening, reconsidering, coming back with a counter-argument that was sharper than my first position. At some point, I realized we'd been there for 2 hours, and the restaurant had emptied around us, and neither of us had noticed. "We should probably," I started. "Yes." He looked around as though registering the empty room for the first time, and something in his expression did something complicated and brief that I filed away without quite knowing what to do with. We split the bill. We walked out. On the pavement outside, he turned in the direction of wherever he lived, and I turned in mine, and he said, "Good discussion." And I said, "It was." And that was the whole of the goodbye. On the walk home in the cold air, I ran through the conversation again, the way I'd been doing, and somewhere between replaying his point about adaptive capacity and my counter about organizational resistance, I stopped walking for a moment on an empty street and thought, oh, I see. And then I said out loud, to no one, to the cold air and the empty pavement, "Absolutely not." I should explain what I mean by absolutely not. It wasn't that I thought nothing would ever come of it. I'm not that naive about my own feelings. I'm quite good at reading rooms, including the rooms inside my own chest, and what I just read was fairly unmistakable. The problem was Owen Pope, not Owen Pope as I was coming to know him, the precise careful, surprisingly funny when he wanted to be person who had sat across from me for 2 hours talking about systems theory and hadn't once checked his phone. That Owen Pope I liked very much and was beginning, it seemed, to like in a way that had acquired a specific quality of warmth that was its own kind of problem. The problem was the Owen Pope that Nadia had reported to me over the following days as she accumulated intelligence the way she always did, through overheard conversations, shared lunches, and the extraordinary social permeability she brought to every office she worked in. "He told Marcus he doesn't do relationships," she said, appearing at my desk on a Thursday morning with a yogurt she wasn't eating, just holding. Not like that it came up out of nowhere. Marcus was complaining about a date that went badly, and Owen just said, apparently very calmly, like he was explaining a tax code, that he found the whole apparatus of romantic relationships more trouble than it was worth. "The whole apparatus," I repeated. His words, according to Marcus. He said he's better on his own, that he's tried it and it doesn't suit him, that he's not good at it. I was quiet for a moment. "That's a fairly clear statement," I said. "It is," Nadia agreed. "So, there we are. Billy, I'm fine. It's useful information, it clarifies things." Nadia looked at me for a long moment, then took a spoonful of her yogurt. "You like him." "I respect him professionally." You came alive, Billy. I've known you for 3 years and you came alive. You're arguing about books. You stayed 2 hours at dinner on a weekday and came in the next morning looking like someone had turned a light on inside you. That's a very dramatic interpretation of me being interested in a good conversation, is it? I looked at my screen. He's made his position clear. He's not interested in that. And I'm not going to make something uncomfortable out of nothing. She left eventually, and I sat with the information the way you sit with something that fits badly, like a coat that's almost the right size. He'd made it clear. Not to me specifically, not because he knew there was anything to address, but clearly and apparently without ambiguity. He didn't want a relationship. He was better alone. He'd tried it. It didn't suit him. Fine. There it was. I filed it away. And then I continued to have dinner with him every Thursday because we'd done it once, and then it had simply happened again the following week. And neither of us had commented on the regularity of it, and I was not. I told myself in a position to make it weird by stopping. Here's what Thursday dinners with Owen Pope are like. They started, always, with something work-related. A problem he wanted to think through out loud, or something I'd raised that week that he wanted to revisit, or a client situation that had moved into complicated territory. We'd sit down, order, and begin from that starting point, and then we'd drift. That was the word for it. We'd drift from work into adjacent things. Management philosophy, behavioral economics, a documentary one of us had watched, a maddening experience with public transport, a news story that had annoyed him. Owen was annoyed by a specific subset of things. Imprecision, performative busyness, the type of person who was always visibly busy without ever accomplishing anything specific. Meetings with no stated outcome, avocados, which he considered aggressively overhyped, noise. He was appreciative of a different specific subset of things, well-structured arguments, even ones he disagreed with, silence when silence was appropriate, a good cup of coffee made without fuss, direct questions, honesty. I knew all of this because he told me in the sideways way he told me things, not sitting down and listing his preferences, but through the texture of conversations where observations emerged like objects breaking the surface of still water. He'd say something about a colleague's meeting style and I'd understand from the economy of his irritation exactly what he valued. He'd mention a book in passing and I'd understand, from the way he mentioned it, what he'd found in it. I was learning him. I tried not to think about it in those terms. I tried to think of it as the natural accumulation of professional familiarity. But somewhere in the fourth week he said something small, something that shouldn't have mattered, and it did. We were talking about a project that had run into problems, and I'd made a suggestion that required reworking a significant chunk of analysis I'd already completed. A lot of people in that moment would have softened the suggestion, qualified it, offered an alternative. Owen just said it directly. Here's what I think should change. Here's why. And I said, you're right, I'll redo it. And he looked at me. This particular look I was beginning to recognize, not quite surprised, but something adjacent, and said, most people push back. Most people push back because they don't want to redo the work, I said. Not because they think they're right. A pause. You don't mind being wrong. I mind a lot, but I mind being wrong and not correcting it more than I mind redoing the work. He was quiet for a moment. Then, that's unusual. Is it? Yes. He picked up his coffee. Most people's primary concern is not appearing wrong, not actually being wrong. I know. It's exhausting watching, isn't it? Something crossed his face, that not quite smile. Yes, he said. It is. And we looked at each other across the table for a moment that lasted precisely one beat longer than it needed to. I looked away first. I always looked away first. What I want to make clear, what I need to make clear, for the sake of the story being honest, is that I was not strategizing. I was not playing a long game or angling for anything. I had heard what he'd said. I had accepted it. I was simply doing the best I could with the reality of having found, for the first time in a long time, a person whose company felt like somewhere I wanted to be. If that meant Thursday dinners and arguments about books and the specific satisfaction of a problem solved together and nothing else, then that was what it meant. I was genuinely at peace with that. Mostly at peace with it. Mostly of the time. It was Nadia who pointed out that something was happening, because it is always Nadia. He looks for you, she said, during a lunchtime walk around the block we'd started taking to escape the break room noise. He asks me work questions. Not just that. When he comes into the room, he looks for you. before he does anything else. He finds where you are and then he goes about his business. I searched for a word. Nadia, that's a very specific observation to make about someone's eye movements. I notice things. It's a gift and a curse. She pulled her coat tighter against the wind. I'm not saying anything is happening. I'm saying something is happening. That sentence doesn't make sense. You know what I mean. I did. I just didn't want to acknowledge it, because acknowledging it meant reopening something I'd carefully put away. The question of what Owen Pope meant by the things he did, which I had tried very hard to treat as simply nothing. He was a direct person. He was private. He had stated clearly what he wanted, which was not this. And the fact that he sought out my company and looked at me sometimes in that particular way was not evidence of anything except that perhaps he, too, found Thursday dinners useful and the company of someone who didn't perform agreement at him somewhat restful. That was all it was. That was all. The conversation that changed things happened on a rainy Friday in the 6th week. It was not, on the surface, the kind of conversation that changes things. There was no dramatic revelation, no sudden confession, no meaningful silence in the rain. Well, there was some rain, but it was incidental. We'd both stayed late again. A client pitch had gone sideways and we'd spent 3 hours reworking the projections. And by the time we'd sent the revised deck, it was past 8, and the window beside my desk was running with rain, and the office had that particular late-night stillness that always felt separate from ordinary time. I was making tea in the break room, an act of small self-preservation, when Owen came in filling his reusable cup from the coffee machine with the efficient, automatic movements of someone who has done this enough times that it requires no thought. We stood there for a moment in companionable silence, waiting for our respective hot drinks. Then he said, out of nowhere, without preamble, "Why are you still single?" I turned to look at him. He was looking at his coffee, not at me, but there was a quality of deliberateness to the looking away that suggested the question was not as casual as its delivery. "That's quite a personal question," I said. "You don't have to answer." But the quality of the silence that followed was not a comfortable silence. It was a waiting one. "I was with someone," I said eventually. "For 3 years. It ended badly. Not dramatically badly, just the kind of bad that happens slowly. When two people decide they want different things but keep not saying it because saying it is hard." I paused. After that, I was careful, or possibly avoiding the whole project, depending on who you asked. He was quiet. "Why do you ask?" I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me then. For a moment, just a moment. Something in his expression was unguarded in a way it usually wasn't. Not vulnerable, exactly. More like the face of someone doing mental arithmetic on a difficult problem, concentrating on it without any performance of concentration. "No particular reason," he said, and picked up his coffee and went back to his desk. No particular reason. The currency of the person who has a very specific reason and isn't ready to say it. I stood in the break room for a moment, holding my mug, listening to the rain. The following Thursday, we went to dinner as usual. We talked about the client pitch, which had recovered. We talked about a restructure that was rumored to be happening and what it would mean for the team. We talked briefly about a film he'd seen that he'd found structurally interesting but emotionally unconvincing. And I asked him what he meant by emotionally unconvincing, and he said, the characters made choices that were motivated by what the plot needed rather than who they were. "That's most films," I said. "Most films are emotionally unconvincing," he said, entirely without rancor, as though this was simply a fact about the world he'd accepted and moved on from. I laughed. I did that more around him than I remembered doing recently. Not the performed laughter of social maintenance, but actual laughing, surprised out of me. He watched me when I laughed in a way that I tried not to think about. Then, as we were waiting for the bill, he said, "I want to ask you something." "All right. And I want you to answer honestly, not the way people answer when they think there's a right answer." "When have I ever answered you any other way?" Something moved in his expression. "Fair? Okay." He looked at his cup, then at me. "Do you enjoy this?" I held very still. "Dinner? This. Thursday. Whatever this is." The question hung between us and the careful way he'd asked it. Not, "What is this not? Are we friends? Just, do you enjoy it?" Told me something about how much weight it was carrying for him, that he'd had to approach it from that angle. "Yes," I said. "Why?" "Because I considered. Because I don't have to perform anything. I can say what I actually think and you'll engage with it, not manage it. That's rare." He was quiet for a moment. "I don't mean to be difficult to talk to," he said then, and the tone of it, slightly careful, slightly unguarded, was different from his usual register, and I understood with a sudden clarity that this was him explaining himself, which he almost never did. "You're not difficult to talk to," I said. "You're direct. That's not the same thing. Other people find it the same thing. Other people want to be agreed with. You don't agree with people. You engage with them. That's not a flaw. It requires people who are comfortable being disagreed with." He looked at me for a long moment. "Are you comfortable being disagreed with?" he asked. "By you, yes, you disagree correctly." "What does that mean?" "It means you disagree about the thing, not about the person. A lot of people conflate those." Another silence, and this one had a different quality. Waited, attentive. "Billy," he said quietly, and then stopped. The bill arrived. The moment, whatever it had been or was becoming, passed. He paid his half, I paid mine. We walked out into the cool night, and he said goodbye at the corner the same way he always did. And I walked home with my heart doing something that I declined to characterize. The conference was a 3-day company event held at a venue an hour outside the city. The kind of event that organizations hold when they want to suggest cohesion and team spirit and synergy, and that everyone attends with the resigned cheerfulness of people who have packed a bag and committed to making the best of it. I am not, by nature, a person who does well at enforced social events. I can perform sociability when needed, but 3 days of group dinners and team-building workshops and evenings in a hotel bar leave me, by the end, needing significant quiet time to recover. I'd booked a corner room specifically for its distance from the communal areas. Owen, I learned, had done the same thing on the other side of the building. We discovered this because we ended up on the first evening both leaving the group dinner at approximately the same time. Him because he had reached his observable tolerance threshold for collective noise. Me because I'd done what I considered a respectable shift of social engagement and needed air, and finding ourselves at the same moment in the quiet corridor beside the fire exit that led to the garden. "Escape route," I said. "Necessary tactical withdrawal," he said. We stood in the cooler air outside. The dinner sounds filtered through the glass doors behind us. Above, the sky had cleared into something spectacular, genuinely dark, with the kind of star visibility you only get far from cities, which neither of us saw much of normally. We didn't talk much. We stood there in the dark for a while, looking up, and the silence between us was the kind that doesn't need to be filled. He was close enough that I was aware of him in a way I'd become very practiced at not thinking about. The warmth of someone standing near you in cool air. After a while, he said quietly, "I'm not good at this. Looking at stars, rooms full of people who want things from me. What things? Reassurance, approval, agreement, a pause. I understand that's what people need. I just can't always give it in the way they want. You don't have to. The last team I managed said I was." He stopped. They used the word isolating. I was careful with my voice. Were they right? Partially. I had a lot to prove in that role. Overcorrected on professionalism. Made it hard to. Another stop. He seemed to be working through something, choosing words with the same precision he brought to everything else. Made it hard to feel like I was approachable. "You're approachable," I said. He looked at me. "To the right people," I added. "Some people don't need the warm-up rounds, the preamble. They can just start. A pause. You're one of those people." "Apparently." I looked up at the stars. "You are too, for what it's worth. You don't make me do the preamble." He was quiet for a moment. Then, very simply, "No." We stood there a while longer. Eventually, we went back inside separately, in the tactful way people exit a moment that has said enough without overstaying its welcome. But I lay in my hotel room that night and replayed it. The quiet, the stars, the particular quality of his voice when he said, "You're one of those people." And I let myself, just for that night, want something I'd been very careful not to want. Just for that night. The second day of the conference included a workshop on collaborative decision-making that put Owen and me on the same team of 6. This was both excellent and complicated. It was excellent because we worked well together in the objective, observable, professionally demonstrable way we always worked well together, dividing up the problem, instinctively filling in each other's reasoning, arriving at conclusions from different routes that happened to converge. It was complicated because at one point we reached a disagreement, a genuine one, about the optimal approach to the final part of the exercise, and we argued it quietly and precisely. while the other 4 team members watched us with the slightly stunned expression of people watching a tennis match played at an unexpected speed, and eventually Owen said, "Your reasoning is better," and changed his position without any apparent discomfort, and Nadia, who was on an adjacent team and should not have been listening, gave me a look across the room that I absolutely refused to acknowledge. After the workshop, during the coffee break, Priya came to stand beside me with her cup and said, in a very careful, neutral tone, "You two are something. We're colleagues. Colleagues don't finish each other's sentences. We've worked closely for 6 weeks. That's Billy." She sipped her coffee. "I'm not saying it like it's a problem. I'm just saying it like it's a thing." She walked away. I stood with my coffee. It was a thing. I knew it was a thing. The question was whether the thing was something that would continue to be managed and contained, and occasionally very slightly painful, or whether something had already shifted in the atmosphere between us in a way that was going to require a different kind of handling. The third day ended with a group dinner that went on longer than planned, and most people drifted to the hotel bar afterward. I made it an hour before the noise and the warmth and the general density of it hit the ceiling of what I could manage, and I slipped out and found a quiet corner of the lobby, an armchair beside a window that looked out onto the dark garden, and sat there with a glass of water and the relief of the quiet. Owen found me there 20 minutes later. He came and sat in the matching armchair across the low table, set down his own drink, a coffee, of course, incomprehensibly at 11 at night, and looked at me. "I've been thinking about something," he said. "What?" He looked at his coffee, then back at me. I said to Marcus that I don't, that relationships aren't something He stopped. Started again. "I've said that to people recently. That I'm better on my own." "I know," I said carefully. "You know?" Nadia is very thorough. Something crossed his face, not quite embarrassment, something more like the expression of someone who has been slightly more transparent than they intended. "Ah, it's fine. You meant it." I meant it when I said it." A pause. The kind that lands. "When I said it," he repeated quieter. "I meant it then. I want to be honest about this because I think." He stopped again, and I could see him working, the way he worked on a problem, carefully, without pretending it was simpler than it was. "I think I've been wrong. About the conclusion, not about the data that led me there. The data was accurate. I had a relationship that was very bad for both of us because we were completely unsuited, and I stayed in it long past the point where I should have ended it, and it was exhausting. In a way that changed how I thought about the whole apparatus," I said, very quietly. He looked at me. Then, almost to himself, "Of course she told you that word specifically. She's a journalist at heart." A brief silence. The lobby was warm and quiet. From somewhere down the corridor, I could hear the distant sounds of the bar. "The thing is," he said, and now his voice had shifted again, lower, more careful, with the quality of someone saying the true version of a thing they've rehearsed several ways. "I think I made a generalization from a specific case, and what I've been doing these past weeks, whatever I've been doing with you." He stopped again, looked at me very directly. "I noticed that it doesn't feel like what I described. It doesn't feel like trouble. It feels like the opposite of trouble. My heart was doing something that required ignoring." "Owen," I said, I don't know how to do this." The soft version of saying something. I don't. I don't need the soft version. I know." Something in his expression, something careful and unguarded at the same time. "That's the point." The silence between us stretched, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the specific silence of two people who have arrived somewhere together and are both standing in the doorway of it. "I don't know what I'm asking you," he said with an honesty so direct it almost hurt. "I don't know how to ask it. I know that I don't want these." He gestured slightly, vaguely, in the way of a person indicating a whole pattern of Thursday evenings and late offices and fire exits and quiet gardens. "I don't want whatever this is to stop. I know that much." "Neither do I said. He looked at me. "That's it? What else do you need?" A pause. Then the almost smile, the one I'd cataloged from the beginning, the one that lived just at the edge of his expression and required knowing to see. "Nothing," he said. "I think that's enough for now." We sat in the lobby chairs for another hour talking about nothing in particular, and it was the best hour of those 3 days, and possibly the best hour of those 3 days, and possibly the best hour of the past several months. And I drove home the next morning feeling like a window had been opened somewhere in my chest, letting in air I hadn't known I'd been missing. We didn't name it at first. That was fine. Neither of us needed to. What we had, what Thursday became, and then Thursday and Monday, and then whatever day a reason presented itself, was the same thing it had been, with the addition of certain things that had not been there before. He touched my arm when he wanted my attention and didn't pull away immediately. He sat closer. When I said something that amused him, he let it be visible instead of containing it. Small things. The small things were everything. The first time he came to my flat, ostensibly to look at a data model I'd been building that I'd described badly on the phone, and he'd said with characteristic bluntness, "I'll just come and look at it." He stood in my living room while I made coffee and looked at my bookshelves with the focused attention he brought to all information scanning titles, pulling one out to read the back. "You own this?" He held it up. "The systems thinking book. The one we'd argued about on our first dinner. I've owned it for years, I told you. You argued against the central thesis. I argued against part of the central thesis. The argument is on page 212 if you want to check." He looked at the book, then with a completeness of expression I was still getting used to, because he held things close, and when he let them out they were fully formed, he almost smiled, and put the book carefully back in exactly the gap it had come from. "You're very organized," he said. "You say that like it surprises you." "It doesn't surprise me. It confirms things." "What things?" He looked at me across the room. "That you're the same everywhere. You don't have a work version and a home version. You're the same." "Is that good?" "Yes. Simply. Completely." We sat on my sofa with the data model and the coffee and spent 2 hours arguing about methodology again. And he left at 11 with a piece of paper covered in annotations and the quiet satisfaction of someone who has been given exactly the right kind of problem to engage with. And I stood at the door after he'd gone and pressed my forehead against the wood for a moment just to have somewhere to put the feeling. He was not, I want to be clear, suddenly transformed into a demonstrative person. Owen Pope did not become warm in the way that people who have never been warm become warm in stories, overnight, completely, as though someone had replaced a light bulb. He was still precise, he was still direct, he still said things without softening them. But he softened them for me sometimes, not often, and not in a way that made him unrecognizable. More like the difference between a sentence with a pause in it and the same sentence without. He said, "This matters to me," once. And because he almost never said things like that, it mattered in a way it might not have from someone for whom it came easily. He told me things, gradually. In the sideways way, he told me everything. About his family. A complicated geography of distance and love and things not said between his father and himself. About the previous relationship that had ended badly, not dramatically, as he put it. Just the slow erosion of two people who brought out the worst versions of each other and mistook intensity for suitability. About the loneliness of being someone who communicates differently, who has to translate himself constantly into a register that other people can receive, and the specific exhaustion of that. "With you, I don't have to translate," he said once. We were in a restaurant, a new one, not our usual Thursday place, because Thursday had expanded into other evenings and the geography of our routine had begun to include new locations. He said it without looking at me, in the way he said things that cost him something, examining his glass. "I know," I said. "That's not." He looked up. "I don't say that to a lot of people." "I know that too." He held my gaze. "How?" "Because you're careful with things that matter. If you didn't mean it, you wouldn't say it." I paused. "You don't say things for effect." A silence. Then quietly, "No." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Briefly, just briefly. And he turned his hand over under mine and held it for a moment before we both by mutual unspoken agreement let go. And I went back to my food as though my pulse hadn't done something spectacular. Nadia found out first. Of course she did. She came to my desk on a morning in the 8th week, set down 2 coffees, sat in the chair and said, without preamble, "You and Owen." "Good morning to you too. Don't make me ask it as a question. Just tell me." I looked at her. She looked at me. She had the expression of someone who already knows the answer and is giving you the chance to say it correctly. "It's new," I said. "It's not. I saw him wait for you outside the building last night. Standing outside, in the cold, for 12 minutes before you came out. I was in a cab. He didn't see me." She sipped her coffee. "Billy, that man stood in the cold for 12 minutes. I looked at the desk. It's new, I said again, and that was the word I kept using because it was accurate, because it felt new the way a first breath of proper spring air is new, the way the first day the light changes feels new, familiar and completely surprising at the same time. She didn't make a big thing of it, bless her. She just drank her coffee and said, "Good," and that was that. The 12 minutes thing, though, I thought about that. I knew he'd waited. He'd been outside when I came out, standing with his coffee cup and his coat, and I'd said, "Were you waiting?" And he'd said I was finishing my coffee, which was technically true and also completely evasive, but 12 minutes was new information. That evening I asked him, "You could have texted me you were outside." He looked at me. I had coffee. 12 minutes is a lot of coffee. A pause. Something in his expression shifted, not quite caught out because Owen Pope was not a person who looked caught out, but something close to the acknowledgement of being seen. "I didn't mind waiting," he said simply. "You could still have texted." "Yes," he agreed. "I could have." He didn't apologize for not doing it. He didn't explain further. He just acknowledged it and let it stand. And the weight of 12 minutes of silent waiting in the cold was, in its way, more articulate than most declarations. We hadn't kissed yet. I want to address this because it is relevant to the story and also because it is in retrospect. A somewhat remarkable fact given the escalating warmth of 8 weeks of increasingly prolonged dinners and evenings on sofas arguing about books and the 12 minutes incident and the hand on the table moment and approximately 10,000 other small charged accumulated things. We had not kissed. We had not discussed kissing. We had not discussed, technically, what any of this was in any formal sense. We had two people circling something, both aware of the circling, neither quite yet willing to name the center of it. This was, I was beginning to realize, somewhat characteristic of Owen. Not evasion. He wasn't afraid of the thing. More like thoroughness. He didn't do things until he was sure. And, sure, for Owen Pope, was a very high bar, arrived at through what appeared to be an internal process of verification that would have made a Swiss watchmaker look hasty. I was patient. I am, fundamentally, a patient person. But it was the kind of patience that is made of something active, a maintained choice every day to let things unfold in their own time. What happened, when it finally happened, was very Owen. We had finished dinner, our usual Thursday place by habit and affection, and we were walking back in the direction of the tube, the autumn air sharp and clear, the streetlights doing their amber work. And we had been quiet for a little while in the comfortable way that had become familiar. And then he stopped walking. I stopped too. Turned to look at him. He was standing on the pavement looking at me with that expression I'd learned, the one of concentrated thought, of working something through. "I want to say something," he said. "All right. And I want it to be accurate, so bear with me. Owen, I spend." He stopped. Started again. "I spend a significant amount of the time when you're not there thinking about things I want to tell you. Observations. Things that happen. I find myself." He paused, something working in his expression. "I find myself saving things. For you. Because your response to things it's the response I want to hear. It's not just that you understand me. It's that you make me want to be understood, which isn't something I've usually." He stopped, looked away briefly, then back. "I'm not good at this. You're doing very well. I'm not." A breath. Then, simply, completely, "I'm in love with you. That's what I'm trying to say." The rest was the working out of it, but the conclusion is that the pavement, the amber lights, the clear, cold air, the way he was looking at me, with the full, level attention he brought to things that mattered, without pretense or performance, just the bare fact of it. "Owen," I said, "you don't have to. I'm in love with you too." I said it immediately, without calculation, because it was true and had been true for a while, and there was no version of this moment in which I was going to make him wait for that. That's not in question. He looked at me. Then something happened in his face. Not the controlled, almost smile I'd catalogued, but the real one, the one underneath, that opened something up in his expression that made him look, just briefly, young and unguarded and completely real. Then he stepped forward, carefully, and kissed me. Not urgently. Nothing Owen did was urgent, it was all deliberate, but with the complete attention he brought to everything, his hand coming up to my jaw. And it was exactly what 8 weeks of accumulated wanting had been building toward, which is to say, it was worth every single minute of the wait. When we separated, he stayed close, his forehead nearly touching mine. That took me a long time, he said. I know. I was. A pause. Checking. Checking what? That it was real. That I wasn't. He exhaled. That I was right about what I felt. I'm not. A wry quality entered his voice that made me want to kiss him again immediately. I've been wrong about myself before. I wanted to be sure. And now you're sure. Yes. Simply. Completely. The way he said everything true. Now I'm sure. We walked to the tube. He held my hand. With the same deliberate quality he brought to everything. Fingers properly interlaced, and didn't let go until we had to go in separate directions. And I got on my train and pressed my back against the doors and grinned at the middle distance in a way that alarmed at least 2 other passengers. I want to describe the 2 months that followed, because they were the kind of months that deserve describing. They were ordinary in many ways. We still worked together. We still had Thursday dinners, with the addition of other evenings and, increasingly, weekend afternoons that started with one specific purpose and extended indefinitely, as neither of us reached a point of wanting it to end. We still argued about books and systems theory and the correct way to structure a client presentation. He was still precise and direct and occasionally infuriating in the particular way of someone who is almost always right. But the ordinary was different now, in the way that the same room looks different with the light on. He left a book at my flat, deliberately I thought, though he would certainly have called it forgetfulness if I'd pressed him, and then came back for it and then left it again. And eventually it simply lived on my shelf between 2 of mine as though it had always been there. He met Nadia properly, which was an experience. Nadia, to her enormous credit, treated him entirely normally, asked him direct questions, accepted direct answers, didn't try to make him perform warmth he wasn't going to perform. He's good, she told me afterward with the brevity of a verdict, delivered by someone who does not give them lightly. I met his friend Joel, who had known Owen for 15 years and greeted me with a warmth that suggested he'd been waiting for this specific introduction for some time. He shook my hand and said, "He talks about you." And Owen said evenly, "Joel." And Joel said, "He definitely talks about you." And I decided I liked Joel very much. There were mornings, there were quiet evenings when we sat on the same sofa with different books, and the silence had no tension in it, just the ease of 2 people who didn't need to fill every space. There were the specific, complete happinesses of ordinary life, a good meal made badly that we ate anyway, a long walk on a cold Sunday that went further than intended, a disagreement about something trivial that resolved itself into laughter because neither of us could quite take the stakes seriously enough to stay annoyed. I was, in a way I had not been in a long time, entirely content, which is perhaps why what happened in the 9th week caught me so completely off guard. We were at my flat on a Sunday evening. We'd spent the afternoon working through something for a Monday deadline, both of us with our laptops out, documents open, periodically consulting each other across the coffee table. And we'd ordered food and eaten, and the work had finished, and we were in that Sunday evening state of shared comfortable tiredness. He was quiet for a while. I'd learned to read his silences. There were working silences and comfortable silences, and the particular silence he produced when something was happening inside that he was in the process of resolving. This one was the last kind. I let it be. And then he said, without any particular lead-up, without preamble or softening, in the direct way he said everything, "I want to marry you." I looked at him. He looked back at me with the expression of someone who has just heard themselves say a sentence and is processing its existence in the world. "I don't," he said, and stopped. That came out. It came out quite clearly, actually. I mean, he looked at his hands, then back at me, and his expression was something I'd never quite seen on him before. Not uncertain exactly, because Owen was rarely uncertain, but startled by himself in a way that it was genuinely endearing, and I would keep that information for the rest of my life. I meant it as a statement of, I wasn't proposing. That would require more checking, a pause, the almost smile. Yes, how much more checking? Billy, I'm asking seriously. Ballpark. He looked at me and I looked back, and we stayed like that for a moment. The 2 of us with the weight of what he'd said hanging in the warm evening air of my living room. Ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. "Not much," he said quietly. "Honestly, not much more." Not much more turned out to be, precisely, 3 weeks. 3 weeks of everything being exactly as it was, with the addition of a slight constant low-frequency awareness in me of the thing he'd said, and the thing he'd almost said, and the thing that was apparently in the process of becoming a very specific other thing. I didn't bring it up. He didn't bring it up. We were, both of us, the type of people who could wait for things in their own time. But I noticed him sometimes. The particular quality of attention he gave to certain moments, as though weighing them. I noticed it, and I let it be. The 3 weeks passed. We had dinners. We had Sundays. We had work mornings and long evenings, and one spectacular argument about a methodology question that lasted 3 days across text messages and concluded with him admitting my position had merit, and me admitting his counter-argument had changed something in my original reasoning, which amounted to a draw and satisfied both of us completely. And then it was a Sunday in the 11th week, which was also the first Sunday in December. And it was very cold outside and very warm inside, and we were in his flat for the first time since I'd noticed him begin to make it, almost imperceptibly, almost without comment, somewhat more mine as well, a mud that had migrated, a corner of the bookshelf that had acquired my books, small territorial markers that neither of us had discussed. We'd had dinner, and we were sitting on his sofa, and the conversation had arrived at one of its natural quiet places. He put down his cup. He turned toward me slightly. He said with all the same precision he brought to everything, "I've done the checking. I want to marry you. That's what I want. I wanted to ask you properly, not." A brief acknowledgement of the previous declaration. Not like that was fine. It was chaotic. You looked confused. I was. He paused. I was surprised by myself. I hadn't planned to say it yet. But you meant it. Of course I meant it. I don't say things I don't mean. I looked at him. He looked at me. The lamp beside the sofa made his face warm, and his expression was open in the way I'd come to understand was rare and was offered carefully and was one of the most valuable things I knew. "Ask me then," I said. He looked at me for a moment, something moving in his expression, something that settled into certainty. "Will you marry me?" he said, not with a question mark, with the same tone he used for everything true, a statement and an inquiry at once, as though the answer was contained in the asking. "Yes," I said, immediately, without a single moment's hesitation. He exhaled the smallest sound, and it contained in its brevity something enormous, the release of someone who has been careful for a very long time about a very important thing and is now, finally, certain. "Good," he said. "That's it. Good. It's the right word. Most people say I'm not most people." "No," I said, and I was smiling so widely it almost hurt. "You absolutely are not." He kissed me then, and I kissed him back, and outside it was cold in December, and the city was making its December sounds, and inside it was warm and entirely right. I want to tell you what happened after, because the after is part of the story. Nadia cried briefly and then denied having cried, and I allowed her the dignity of the denial. Marcus shook Owen's hand and said, "Honestly, mate, I saw this coming from week 2. And Owen said, "Week 2 seems aggressive," and Marcus said, "You waited for him outside in the cold for 12 minutes. And Owen said, "I had coffee," and Marcus said, "You didn't have any coffee." And Owen's expression did something magnificent that I mentally photographed and stored. Joel took me aside at the dinner they organized to celebrate and said, "Thank you." And I said, "For what?" And he said, "He was," and stopped, and started again. He was very alone, not unhappily. Owen's not unhappy alone, but there's a difference between being content alone and being found. He's been found. I can see it. I thought about that for a long time afterward, being found. The idea that two people can look for each other without knowing they're looking, can circle toward each other across the ordinary geography of offices and Thursday evenings and fire escapes and hotel lobbies and rainy Fridays, drawn by some quality in the other that resonates, that says, "Here, this is a frequency you can rest in." Owen told me much later in the way he told me things, not as a planned disclosure, but as something that surfaced in conversation quietly when it was ready, that he had for a long time genuinely believed himself to be better alone, not as a self-pity, not as a wound, as an assessment. He'd done the analysis, looked at the available evidence, arrived at a conclusion. The whole apparatus, as he called it, had produced nothing but expensive maintenance and a gradual reduction in both parties. "And then?" I asked. He looked at me. "And then the data changed." "I changed the data." "You were new data. The model needed updating." That is the least romantic way to describe falling in love. I could describe it another way. "Could you?" He was quiet for a moment, considering this with the seriousness he brought to all genuine questions. Then, you made the world easier to be in. Smaller, in the good sense. More manageable. I came home from work and the thing I wanted was to tell you things. Not because I needed advice or because there was a problem, just because they felt more real after I'd told you. Like they'd been properly verified. I looked at him for a long moment. That, I said, is the most romantic thing you've ever said to me. It's accurate. It's both. He looked almost pleased, which was everything. We got married in the spring. Not a large wedding. Owen's tolerance for large gatherings being what it was, and mine being similar though for different reasons. A small room, good light. The people we actually wanted there. When we exchanged our vows, Owen had written his himself. He read them from a piece of paper because he said he was not leaving accurate language to memory, which made Nadia produce a sound that was either a laugh or a sob, and I still don't know which. What he said was precise and complete and entirely his own. He said that he had been wrong about something important for a long time, and that being wrong was uncomfortable, and that being corrected, really corrected, by evidence, by reality, was the beginning of something better. He said that I was the thing he hadn't been looking for when he found it, which he considered the best kind of finding. He said that he intended to keep being honest with me even when it was difficult, because that was the only way he knew how to love someone correctly, and that he hoped that was enough. It was more than enough. It was exactly enough. It was everything. I wrote mine as I felt them, which is to say they were slightly less structured and somewhat longer, and included a reference to the spreadsheet incident on the night we met, which made him look at me with that expression, the real smile, the one underneath, and shake his head very slightly because of course I'd put a spreadsheet in the wedding vows of course I had. We were exactly who we were. Later. Weeks later, months later, in the ordinary time that follows extraordinary decisions, he said to me, I still don't understand how it happened this fast. We were in bed on a Sunday morning, the curtains doing a poor job against the light, the particular easiness of early mornings that feels like the truest time there is. 2 months, I said. 2 months and 3 days. You counted. Of course I counted. That's an extraordinarily short time too. He paused, looking at the ceiling with the expression of someone re-examining a sequence of events for logical consistency. I had made a decision, a wrong decision, based on the available information. The information was incomplete, evidently. He turned his head to look at me, and the morning light was on his face, and he looked settled, complete, like a problem that had found its correct solution and stopped requiring solving. You are very unfair data. Unfair. Anomalous. You don't conform to any of my prior models. I'll take that as a compliment. It is one. He said it simply as he said all true things. I was certain I didn't want this. I want you to know that, not to be difficult about it, but because I think the certainty is important. I was genuinely certain, and then you were just there, and then the certainty wasn't. I thought about this. About the 2 months. About Thursday dinners and late offices and stars above a hotel garden, and a rainy Friday break room, and a proposal that arrived unannounced in my living room, and then arrived again properly 3 weeks later. Both times meaning the same thing. For what it's worth, I said, I was fairly certain too that this wouldn't happen, that I was fine not having it. Were you? I was fine. I was genuinely fine. I paused, and then I met you, and fine became a much smaller word. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the complete simplicity that was one of his greatest qualities, good. I laughed. He let it happen. And outside the light was getting better, and the morning was expanding around us, and there was nowhere else I wanted to be. The notice on the corkboard, the one with the red thumbtack, had said, all project updates to be routed through Mr. Pope starting this week. Please introduce yourselves at your earliest convenience. I had introduced myself. I had, as it turned out, introduced myself at exactly the right time. If you made it to the end, you're my kind of person. Leave a subscribe, comment down your favorite part of the story, and if you want early access to videos, exclusive content, or just want to support the channel, hit that join button right below the video. Even one member genuinely means the world to me. See you in the next one.